Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
I'm with Gul Bukhari, a well-known Pakistani columnist, journalist who lives in London, and with Mohammed Taqi, a keen observer of the Pakistani political situation, who is in the US. So I'm connecting the time zones. I'm in Delhi, of course. Gul is in London, and Taqi is in Florida. Both of you, welcome to the Print Debates.
Thank you so much.
So today we are talking about the crisis in Pakistan, which is interesting because the media fraternity, people like me, my colleagues in Pakistan, and of yours, Gul. Taqi, you're a medical doctor, but of course you write a regular column in the Pakistani press and have done for several years. Our informant in Pakistan, the media fraternity is informant because it is challenging the Pakistani military establishment. So Gul, you were picked up by unknown people in June of 2018. Tell us a little bit about what happened exactly and your comments on what's happening today.
Well, we call them known people now. Now they're not unknown. The first thing. It's become a joke that it's not the water and power department or the agriculture department or any other department or even the police or the federal investigation agency. Nobody abducts people except the Pakistani military, right? And its agencies.
Are you absolutely sure about that?
I am. Why wouldn't I be sure? Is there any, you see, the journalists or the human rights activists or politicians, they're not attacking WAPTA, the water and power, or they're not attacking the KESC, the electricity grid, or they're not attacking the post office, right? Basically, those people are abducted who criticize the military's role in politics in Pakistan. It's as simple as that. Why would somebody else come and why would a postman come and abduct people, right? If the criticism is on the military's meddling in politics and political engineering, and thereby messing up Pakistan's, economy, systems, rights records, everything, right? So obviously, common sense tells you that, all the people, the list of people who have ever been abducted, tortured, or killed have criticized the military establishment.
Okay.
So there's that right in front of you.
Okay. So perhaps, I didn't introduce the subject of this debate properly, and perhaps I was getting ahead of myself. But we know that in the last 1 week, a journalist called Asad Ali Toor in Islamabad, a popular video logger, a vlogger or a vlogger, was 3 men barged into his house in the middle of the night in Islamabad, and he was tortured. He was brutally beaten up. Subsequently, protests have broken out across Pakistan, and on Saturday over the weekend, there was a big protest at the National Press Club in Islamabad, where 3 journalists, mainly Munize Jahangir, Asma Shirazi, and Hamid Mir, spoke very eloquently. And Hamid Mir, since has been asked by his office to go off his show called Capital Talk. Hamid is a very influential and a journalist in Pakistan. So Taqi, your comments about what's happening inside Pakistan today.
What is happening inside Pakistan vis-a-vis the press and freedom of expression is not really new, but it is new to you if you have not heard or seen it before. This has been going on ever since the Pakistani army decided to take over the country's control. I would take it back all the way to 1959. The first military dictator, Ayub Khan, Field Marshal, what he did was one of the first actions of the army regime then was to take over Progressive Papers Limited, which was a conglomerate of left-leaning liberal papers, which was brought out at the behest of Muhammad Ali Jinnah himself by Mian Iftikharuddin. Pakistan Times was a leading paper of the era, and Ayub's people actually took it over at gunpoint. April 1959. That was the most blatant takeover of newspapers
So that,
in the history of
that
Pakistan.
takeover from 1959 to 2021, of course, we follow Pakistan's politics very, very closely.
Yes.
We know that the army, for more than half of Pakistan's existence, has not just been directly in power, but is like a long shadow that overlooks everything. But in today's context, what do you make of what's happening with Hamid Mir and with the other journalists who've been picked up and tortured?
Well, what we have been saying all along is that ever since a semblance of democracy returned to Pakistan in 2008, the army has tried to wrestle back, and I use the word army quite in a considered manner. Military or armed forces, Air Force does not do this. Pakistan Navy does not do this. This is only the army that is involved in doing stuff like this, because they are the ones who have the chokehold on Pakistani politics and power. So you would not hear me or Gul or Hamid Mir criticize Air Force or Navy. So let's be very specific. This is only the army that does it. What has happened is in 2008, when General Musharraf was ousted after a relatively short struggle and people's protest movement, the army lost some ground at that time. And what it has been trying to do since is to wrestle back all of that space that it had ceded to the civilians in one way or the other. So in a way, democratic dispensation has continued, but democracy has not existed as such. And what we have seen over the last couple of weeks is another chapter in that sordid saga, so to speak. They have been curtailing freedom of expression. My own column was shut down along with a Baloch Sindhi writer, Mir Muhammad Ali Talpur, in the Daily Times Pakistan. So many other anchors have been taken off air, Talat Hussain, for example. So what military is trying to do, or army is trying to do, is basically just dictate the terms of what can or cannot be said on the airwaves and in the print media, and they are doing it very blatantly. By the day, it is getting worse. We have seen martial laws. I grew up during General Zia's martial law regime. My father was a working journalist back then, and what I remember from those days is some mornings we would pick up the newspapers and you would see the column spaces which were empty. And I would ask my dad, what exactly happened here? Akhbar khali kaise chhap gaya? So that was a way of the journalists protesting that if a story was removed later in the evening, small hours of the night before they went to press, that was a novel way of protesting. The journalists would not fill it with another story. So the people knew there was something here that was not published. So those blank spaces were, and journalists, Pakistan Federal Union of Journalists, late Minhaj Barna, who was one of the key agitationists and organizers, they protested. So it has been both ways. You know, they try to oppress and the press fights back. It has been going on, but back then the press advice was very clear. People would know. They called it the press advice. It has been there.
I'm going to interrupt you for a bit because I do want to bring in Gul and ask her. Gul, what do you make of Hamid Mir's statements that evening at the Islamabad Press Club and subsequently his removal from his show? Why do you think Geo News would have done this?
Okay, so I'll come to that, but very quickly, I will first, when Dr. Sahib was saying that they want to claw back that space which they lost after General Musharraf left, I would add that not only all that space and more. It has been really unprecedented what they're doing to the press and the media now. People who have been in this field for 40 years, they say we have not seen this even during martial law, the actual martial law, the declared martial law, right? So the first point is that.
What do you think would be the difference? I mean, of course, you must have been far too young to have lived under martial law. Perhaps Taqi says he remembers his father and the story that he just told us. But in what way is it worse, do you think?
So they used to stop news or whatever. But now they're actually feeding the news, right? They're actually having people kicked out. For example, in the entire Pakistani talk show space, there must be about 50 talk shows, right? From 7 till 11 on 50 different channels, or whatever many different channels, 50 or 100 talk shows that are going on every evening. 95% of them are establishment oriented people. 5% or 5 people who were not the establishment's sort of mouthpieces, all kicked out, right? So I was the first one, by the way. I was with Buck News. First, I was kicked out. And then it was followed by Matiullah Jan. And then it was right at the end, I think it was Talat Hussain, but Nusrat Javed and who else? There was maybe one other person, right?
So why were you kicked out, and why were all these other people asked to go or kicked out, and why was Matiullah Jan picked up last year?
Well, last year he was picked up because of his continuing reporting on the Supreme Court, in which he was bringing all the comments, all the injustices with regard to Justice Qazi Faiz Isa's case in the Supreme Court, which was very trumped up, which was ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. That without sending him an FBR notice and so on and so forth, without asking him a single question, they send a presidential reference against him in the Supreme Judiciary. It was a complete sort of trumped up thing in order to try and prevent him from becoming the Chief Justice when he has to become, because he had done a couple of decisions and suo motu notices. One was on a Quetta blast in which over 40 years, I don't know, I remember, I can't, 140 or 40 lawyers had died. And the other was the Faizabad Dharna of 2017, I think, which was orchestrated very much by the ISI. And in his suo motu notice and in his decision, he had named Faiz Hamid, the DG ISI. He had questioned what was going on. He had asked for these people to be hauled up and called to account, right?
Yeah.
So, Mati, for that particular reason. But all of us.
Tell me about yourself. Why were you kicked out, and why were you picked up? I want to know.
That, I think Dr. Saab can tell you the joke. He called me and he said, Gul, tumhari, your bad luck was that you started to tweet in Urdu, right? But the thing is that, of course, I have been very vociferously criticizing the military's role, and I was also criticizing, by that time, the judiciary, the way the way Nawaz Sharif's case was done. There were 450 people in the Panama case, right? And only they went after Nawaz Sharif. And then, I don't know if you know that Judge Arshad Malik, I think, where he is on video saying that I was blackmailed with a video of mine from years ago in Multan, right? And I had to give this sort of decision against Nawaz Sharif because of that blackmail by the ISI. And he's on record saying all of that. So my criticism on the judiciary and my criticism on the army, as Dr. Sahib says, don't say military, on the army. And the third thing was my support for the Pashtun Tahaffuz movement. These were the 3 main reasons. And they were told, I mean, I was interrogated on these 3 issues, basically.
Right. So can I come to you, Taqi, or I should say Dr. Taqi because you're a medical doctor, but you know, I noticed this. I mean, I follow the Pakistani press quite closely, and I noticed that it is a very interesting community. You know, like you said yourself, since 1959, the Pakistani press has been under siege in a way. But it also speaks out very often. I mean, you know, you saw Hamid Mir and Asma Shirazi, as well as Munize Jahangir, spoke very, very eloquently, saying things like, "Ye mera mulk hai, ye hamara mulk hai, aur hum aur isko kisi aur ke haathon mein nahi hum isko jaane denge." But my question to you is that, you know, what Gul just said is that she was talking about the PTM, the Pakhtun Tahaffuz movement. Now, very few journalists in Pakistan write about the PTM. Why do you think that is?
Well, the coercion is there. Media is controlled in so many different ways these days, and when there is a manner of what they call the state media, where the owner also has multiple other business interests, and the print or electronic publication, maybe just one of those, they can be coerced into muzzling their own anchors and writers and spokespeople in so many different ways. What I was trying to say earlier was that there's a quantitative or qualitative difference between the martial laws. When it is a blatant martial law, for example, General Zia's martial law, we knew where the press advice was coming from. General Mujib is sitting in the information department, and it's coming down the chain of command. My father was arrested twice back in the day, so we knew exactly who took him and where he was. Now, the power centers have sort of been devolved, and a sense of impunity has been created at the highest level. Some of these actions that are taken, I can say at least about my own column, it was taken at the highest level in a meeting where General Rahil Sharif was present, the DG ISPR, Asim Bajwa was there, and I think he was foreign minister at the time, Sartaj Aziz was present, and a column was discussed. And at that time, a brigadier who was present in the meeting actually ended up giving the story out. This is where it was discussed. General Bajwa, the current army chief, he sits with 30 anchors and he discusses individual journalists. So an air of impunity is created, and then there are people within, there's 3-4 different army agencies. There's military intelligence, there's ISI, there's another one also. Then they take cue from the top, and a lot of them actually take it upon themselves to do certain things also. That is another factor in there. But the bottom line is that this hybrid regime creates a situation where the military has the plausible deniability. Well, there is a civilian dispensation. You can go talk to them. The interior minister denied today, for example. The information minister says that it did not happen. Back then, there was somebody that you could affix responsibility to, and they were really keen to take the responsibility.
No,
That is what the hybrid regime does.
I think what the information minister Fawad Chaudhry said was that it did not come from the government, and that the government had nothing to do with Hamid Mir's sort of removal from his talk show. But he didn't say anything about the, obviously he couldn't say anything more about how it happened or why it happened. Yeah.
The government can't do it either. It's not the civilian government, right? So Hamid Mir's, I was talking to a few people, and they said they will step back. This has become really big. And I said, look, the kind of, in Urdu we say, taqat ka nasha. Jis taqat ke nashe mein, wo choor hain. So something will happen. And the first thing that happened was his show, he was barred from his show. And then the second thing that happened was there was an application in Gujranwala to institute a case of treason against Hamid Mir. And then the third thing, some PTI woman, MNA, has moved a resolution in parliament that he should be tried for treason and so on and so forth. But as you said,
evidently there are cases against Hamid Mir in several parts of the country, all treason charges. So, and I'm sure that the next move will be that that there will be pressure on the lawyers, so that therefore, fewer and fewer people will come out to defend him.
So they will not get anywhere. You see, the law is, they will not get anywhere. Before I move to the thing. The thing is that the law states that it's the government that has to bring treason charges, or ordinary citizens cannot. So this ridiculous step they take all the time. They did it with Nawaz Sharif. They did it with Shahid Khaqan Abbasi. They get unknown people to go and file applications with SHOs of police thanas. And by law, you can't do that, right? A treason case cannot be carried out on the application of a private citizen. That's the first thing. Right. The second thing is that you said that, we speak up despite all of this. But as you can see, we all pay for it also. Hamid is carrying bullets. Assad got beaten up. I am today in exile. I was abducted. They might never have let go of me had there been not the kind of outrage that immediately resulted from it. But we pay for it as well. So many people who are now sitting abroad, etc. And when Dr. Saib talked about his column, my column was also dropped, right? And I'll tell you a very interesting story about the column being dropped. It was 14th of August. And, 14th of August is celebrated as Independence Day. And so I was sitting very hurt and upset and, okay, what independence? We are an occupied country, right? And I tweeted a photo of our former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif in that bulletproof type of, what's it called, armored car with jail-like sort of things on the window. And I said, this is not a free country. This is not a free country. I'm not going to celebrate freedom. And after that was August. My paper, I used to write for The Nation, a weekly column, had, newspapers are like that. When Begum Kulsum Nawaz Sharif's wife, was very, very ill and it became very apparent, they said to me that, please, can you get her obituary ready? I did. She survived for a while. A few months went by. And when she actually died, what month it was, I can't remember. Was it November? I don't know. So I remembered, I said, oh my God, I was crying. And I called up the editor and I said, do you remember I gave you that? And he said, Gul, I can't publish it. I'm sorry. You have become persona non grata for us. Even an obituary, nothing political, it could not be printed. I gave it to ThePrint and Rama ran it. And ThePrint was the first outlet that ran the obituary of Begum Kulsum Nawaz. The other thing, the funniest thing I'll tell you. So they dropped me from television and everything. The one funniest thing that they did, this friend of mine who works for Geo News, he said, there's an Eid program, we want you to come on it. And I said, look, I don't know anything about chudiyan and kapda and, celebrities. Those are the kind of things that, but I will not be able to contribute. He was after my life. No, you just come, please. It's an Eid program. We're going to record it on such and such day. I said, all right, because he's a friend. Next day, he called me and said, Gul, I'm really sorry, but as you know, the agriculture department takes decisions on who can grace the Geo screen and who cannot, and you are not anymore allowed. So even for Eid show, it is the level of allergy that they develop for independent people who are activists or journalists or bloggers or whatever it is, right? This is the extent. So these are the things that when you ask that question, that what is so different from the past? This is what is so different. This is how totally, and it's a mistake, because by pushing all of us out of the mainstream media, what they've done is they've sent us onto social media where there is no producer sitting behind me on top of the mute button. You know that my producer used to sit on the mute button.
So that's the question, Taqi Sahab, I wanted to ask you कि अभी apologies कि मैंने आपको पिछली दफा interrupt किया जो PTM वाला जो सवाल है कि why isn't the Pakistani media PTM के बारे में क्यों नहीं लिखता है?
The thing is, let's put it in perspective. Pakistan Army is a colonial construct, and they have taken upon themselves that they will define what the national interest is, what is good for Pakistan, and they will also define who goes against the national interest, who's to be declared a traitor. And I say this again with some historical background. When the British were conquering Delhi, who was the most famous traitor who was strung for a lamp pole in Delhi? That was the editor of the Delhi Urdu Akhbar, Maulvi Muhammad Baqir. The Akhbar was a newspaper, one of the earliest Urdu newspapers. It was renamed Akhbar-ul-Zafar, named after Bahadur Shah Zafar. Zafar also means victory, the victory paper. So that is a very long tradition. And then throughout our freedom movement, all the freedom leaders also brought out newspapers. Gandhiji brought out a newspaper. Qaid-e-Azam Jinnah brought out a newspaper. Badshah Khan brought out a newspaper. Rajgopalachari brought out. So this is a very strong tradition that we have of fighting those colonial type mindset and forces. So your question was, why do these people fight back? Hamid Mir has it in him. His father, Professor Waris Mir, was also a writer. They follow their tradition and we follow our tradition.
In fact,
so this dialectic goes on.
I'm going to interrupt you again for a second. You talked about Hamid Mir's father. And I think when Pakistan was on the eve of Pakistan breaking up in 1971,
yes,
and when Bangladesh was created, I think Hamid Mir's father, Professor Mir, was one of the few Pakistanis in Pakistan who was very critical of the policies at the time. And I know this because when Bangladesh celebrated its 50th anniversary, Hamid Mir was invited by the Bangladeshi government to be awarded on behalf of his father. He accepted that award. But go ahead, Taqi sir.
Yes. So the thing of it is, they treat the country, the army treats the country like a fiefdom that is they have inherited, and PTM has basically broken a taboo that the no-go frontier areas, which were the so-called tribal areas, and now they have been merged into Pakhtunkhwa province. There was an iron curtain. People would not know. Very few people like myself were writing about those areas back then, but now through access to social media and these little citizen journalist clips that have been brought out, everything that the army does there sees the daylight. Similar thing in the Pashtun parts of Balochistan and the Baloch parts of Balochistan, where there could not be any reporting. Some of the reporting is coming out. Pakistan army would not let diplomats or journalists go into those regions.
Why not?
I remember.
Why not is the question.
For example, reporting in Quetta, if Carlotta Gall, New York Times journalist, she was beaten up at her hotel. Her stringer was also roughed up. Why? Because she was reporting on the Quetta Shura and the ISI control of that Shura. Now, Quetta is a garrison city. There's a ISI directorate. There's a military selection recruitment center. There's an Air Force base. There's the Pakistan Army's staff college there. Now, how is it possible that a Taliban Shura can exist and the Taliban recruitment ground and sanctuaries and training grounds can exist? So it's a very simple situation. There is a method to their madness. It is not for no reason that they would not let people go there, because there's stuff there. Similar thing in Waziristan, for example, where the Pashtun Tahfuz movement has its stronghold. They were running the Taliban camps, the sword arm of ISI, as Admiral Mike Mullen had put it. The Haqqani network ran its oldest madrasa out of Waziristan, and that was also the training ground for suicide bombers. For example, forward base Chapman bombing was organized, orchestrated out of that area. That was a joint Al-Qaeda, Pakistan, Taliban, and Haqqani network operation. So these are the things that they have been trying to hide, and when these young people actually bring to light, so they have to be banished from the media, and anyone writing about those also gets banished from the media.
So the PTM is therefore persona non grata because it is civilian movement. You would call it a civilian movement, would you?
It is Pashtun Defense League, if you would translate the name, and basically it is a movement of Pashtun youth who have been under the army's heel and the Taliban brutality, living for these kids grew up during this war, which was imposed upon them. On one side is the Taliban, on the other side is the army. I mean, we have been asking this question for ages. How is it possible that Haqqani network can run a camp and a training ground about 1.5 miles across the river from the Pakistani army cantonment? How is it possible? People, because I'm from Peshawar, I'm not from Waziristan, so there is a little bit of a question. How do you know? Well, because we know that region, we are connected, and we want to know about it. And on the other hand, if somebody is actually drawing an iron curtain down on that region, they are trying to hide that. And when these kids who grew up under that kind of oppression, they started airing their grievances, that was to Pakistan Army's dislike. And this, because that area is important, that, the British had a double frontier policy there. They used this particular area as a bridgehead, as a staging ground for their operations in Afghanistan. This 20-year war that has gone on, that has been fought from that particular region. So that area is important to the army's so-called strategic depth theory and practice.
Right. Gul, let me bring the politics of Pakistan into this. Now, both of you have spoken very eloquently about, how the politics or political parties have always been sort of subservient to the military establishment or the army and the ISI, as you say. Now, today I was looking at the Twitter handles of the main political parties, whether it is the Pakistan People's Party, Bilawal Bhutto Zardari, or Maryam Nawaz Sharif. Now, Bilawal has, he had Asad Tur next to him and he was speaking and again spoke very eloquently. And he also said that as the chairman of the Human Rights Committee in the parliament, he's going to talk about these issues. But he didn't take Hamid Mir's name. Why do you think?
You've taken me by surprise. I do not know, possibly because he was with Asad at that time and he may follow it up with a visit to Hamid as well. I do not know. The thing is that this Human Rights Committee that he is a head of has been sitting idle for the last couple of years. I understand that if this committee, asks of the administration, of the bureaucracy to do X, Y, and Z, and even if they don't do it, at least it's going to be doing the right thing. It's going to be doing its own job. But this committee has not been doing its own job. From time to time, there is lip service. So there's, with regard to Hamid Mir, and I think that it's possibly because he was visiting Assad.
So listen,
that is why.
I'm sorry to make it just all about Hamid. It's not about Hamid. The question is, is that, yes, the politicians fight back. We've seen Nawaz Sharif fighting back. He's in exile in London where you are. But it's not enough somehow. They don't stand up and fight. Or is it that they have been fighting for so long and that they're just exhausted now?
I think there's something that Dr. Taqi always says, which is that the political parties have to do the heavy lifting, right? Which they have not done, to be honest. And now what is happening is that there is no unity. When the PDM was created, there seemed to be unity, and it almost seemed as if they're going to achieve their target because everybody was together. And then it broke, right? That momentum broke. I do not know where this momentum will go, but activists and journalists cannot do the role of a political party or of the political parties. Personally, I believe not only do these parties need to come forward and do this, but they also have to be united. But they're not united. Unfortunately, there are elements in all of these parties, not one party, who are basically willing to make deals with the establishment, right? There are those people at the highest levels in the People's Party, in the PMLN, in the other parties. And that is what stops them. In case of PMLN, one thing that I am convinced of is Nawaz Sharif is not going to cut a deal. But he is not only fighting the establishment, he's also fighting within his party, right? Because there are people there. And by the way, very senior people in the People's Party, right? The one other thing that I wanted to add to what Dr. Taqi has said, about why they don't let us go into Balochistan and Fatah and so on, and he's explained it all completely. The thing is that they have made those black holes of information, and they don't want that to change, right? Because if it opens up, then they cannot use those areas for their strategic whatever policies they have for executing their policies, right? They have to stop the press from getting there, from activists to getting there, to understanding what is going on. They will not be able to keep those groups in those areas. So they have to maintain those black holes.
Sure. So, last couple of questions that I want to ask you both, and Dr. Taqi, to you. These comments and what Hamid Mir said the other day at the National Press Club. The question is, he said कि आप हमारे घरों में आते हैं और हमको मारते हैं. He said, हम आपके घरों में नहीं जा सकते, लेकिन हम आपकी कहानियाँ लिखेंगे. And पाकिस्तान की आवाम को बताएंगे कि आपके घरों में से क्या कहानियाँ निकल रही हैं. I mean, of course, these are not the exact words. what do you think he was referring to? And then he used that phrase about General Rani. What was that about?
I have to interrupt. I'm so happy you posed it to Dr. Saib, not me.
Your
Go
turn.
on, Dr. Saib.
You are
Yeah.
next. So don't worry.
Dr. Saib,
Sure. I'm already on the entry control list, so it doesn't really matter to Pakistan. What Hamid Mir was referring to, General Rani was a character back from General Yahya Khan's days. She was a lady consort of the military dictator, army dictator at that time, who was known to wield a lot of power with him. So that was what he was referring to. And from what I gather from social media and other information that I have, is that he was referring to a fling that one of the army generals was having, and that led to some manner of a family feud where he was shot at by his own wife, who was wheelchair bound. This is not a new story. This is about a year-old situation. And a journalist from Summer TV was actually fired for reporting that the general was in London, England at that time, apparently for a dual purpose visit where he was seeking medical assistance as well as meeting one of his Indian counterparts. I wouldn't presume to guess names.
No. I'm not asking you any names, but this is all getting very complicated. So this particular...
No, it is very simple. It is very simple. There was a Pakistani general who was supposed to meet his Indian counterpart in England, but this Pakistani general was also supposed to get some medical assistance. So the journalist from Sama News reports this and sends a little video clip on Twitter that I'm outside this hotel where the Pakistani entourage is here, and this person is... That gentleman was fired by Sama News. So anyone who wants to connect the dot with general that might be is welcome to.
Gul, are you brave enough to connect the dots for us?
Okay, I mean, it's public knowledge, yaar. That was General Faiz Hamid, the current head of the ISI. Basically, the journalist had tweeted a small video clip showing him emerging from the hotel. And he was made to delete not only that tweet. It is public knowledge. I'm not giving any new information. It is public knowledge. That he was made to delete that tweet as well as that video from all his records, and then he was fired as well.
So he was made to delete the video of General Faiz Hamid, the current DG ISI, coming out of that hotel.
Right.
Yeah.
And was he ostensibly meeting his Indian counterpart or somebody from...
That's what the journalist said. You see, this is many months ago.
When was this exactly?
I think
this was
it was
somewhere in early 2020. Early 2020.
Sometime early last year, right? And this must have been, what I can construe is that this must have been a part of that series of meetings which have been going on since 2019, correct?
Right.
But because it was not a public matter and this guy had tweeted it, so those were the consequences. Now he's not working for Sama or any other channel.
Dr. Taqi, you made another point, which is that he was in London, England, for two reasons. One is that he was meeting this in his Indian counterpart or whatever, an Indian official, perhaps from the RNAW, we don't know. But you also said he was here for medical reasons. Was it a surgery or something, or what was it about?
I wasn't consulted medically on that, so I can't really say.
Okay.
But that was the presumption.
That there was a family feud, and his wife, you said, is wheelchair bound.
Yes, and that is what Hamid Mir was alluding to the other day when he made that remark that when you invade our houses and rough us up inside our house, we cannot get into your houses because those are guarded by pickets and bullets and tanks. But we can report on what goes around and goes on within those compounds.
Yeah.
And then he mentioned,
if you're going to make it personal,
yes, that's what he said.
So and yeah, go ahead, Gul.
So everyone in the Charlie's Aunt knows who that general is.
Not only that, this story was known. This episode, rather, has been known all along since it happened. But the shocking part was that Hamid Mir said it out there in public. That was the shocking part. That was something that many people have not understood, including I. But this was not. This was an open secret.
And
right.
let me.
Yeah, go ahead.
Jyoti, let me add something here. Some people might say that it was an off-color remark and it was getting into someone's personal life and whatnot.
That's what I was going to say, actually.
Yes. But what I would say is, not too long ago, I think it was end of April, General Bajwa sat down with 30-odd journalists or so, and the question of attack on another journalist, Absar Alam, came up. And he says, Absar Alam was shot while walking outside his house. He thankfully survived. But when this question was put up to General Bajwa, and this has been reported, instead of actually answering that question, he went on talking about what he called the extracurricular activities of Absar Alam. Now, Absar Alam was brave enough to actually tweet and say, I acknowledge and concede and regret my extracurricular activities. What about you all's, whatever you guys have been up to? So I think General Bajwa made it fair game for any journalist to come out and say what Hamid Mir said. If it is good for the gander, I suppose it is good for the goose also.
But I would add to what Dr. Saib said. Listen, this has become a way with them, right? The first time, to my knowledge, that they did this, ladki ke bhai, right? That the reporter or the journalist was doing some hanky-panky with some woman, right? And that woman's brothers have attacked him. They started this with Hamid Mir, right? Then they did it to
Who is Hamid Mir, Gul? Who is Hamid Mir?
Hamid Mir is a very known in
Pakistan investigative journalist of GeoJung Group.
Okay. Of GeoJung Group. He works with the news, right? And so he was attacked. I can't remember it was 2017. Or 18. I can't remember. Anyway.
Right.
It was before I was abducted. Anyway, so he was attacked so brutally, middle of the day on 0 point in Islamabad, with steel rods and with knives and whatever, because he had been told, don't report this, don't do this story, don't do that. He kept on and on and on, and he was attacked in the middle of Islamabad in broad daylight. And basically some laborers who were working on a building next to that spot. So they came rushing and his life got saved. Anyway, I flew into Islamabad the next morning, 7 o'clock flight or something, and I went straight to the hospital. And, before that, the night before, when he was actually, the news broke, I was crying and I was tweeting very emotionally. So what they did was that they put it about, कि इसको लड़की के भाइयों ने मारा है. And that night, I had gone off to sleep crying, but I remember Dr. Saab was one of those people who were laughing and making memes on Twitter, which I saw the next morning, because they were all calling, because it kind of fits in. I'm from an army family myself. कि गुल के भाइयों ने अहमद को मार दिया, ठीक है? So and then they put it out in a publication which one of their touts runs, and then the police started asking Hamid Mir कि आपके गुल बुखारी से क्या ताल्लुकात हैं? He said, for God's sake, So they started this then. Then the Qamar Javed Bajwa Sahib did this about to Absar Alam, and now they've done it with Asatu. कि उसको तो लड़की के बाद. So there are two things that they come up with. One, they first call into question your credentials. They said Absar Alam is not a Sahafi. For God's sake, he's done 30 plus years of journalism. You cannot justify an attack on him by saying that A, it was ladki ke bhai, and B, he's not a journalist. They did that to me.
Sorry to interrupt. Ladki ke bhai meaning this woman who is allegedly X-person is having a relationship with, an affair with, uske bhaiyon ne inko mara hai. Is that what the sentence is?
That is it.
Every time these duffers come up with the same thing.
Saturday ko jab press club mein jo protest ho raha tha, and I think today Hamid Mir has said in some article where he has said ki jo mere bagal mein ek jo banda baitha hua tha, an elderly journalist called Kaisar Butt, who also said ladki ke bhai, and he said I got so mad about that तो फिर मैंने कहा कि सिर्फ लड़की के भाई क्यों, लड़की की माँ के बारे में भी आप बात कर सकते हैं. And then he went on to this General Rani reference.
Yes. And why, tell me why, there is a question. Why are only the anti-establishment journalists are carrying on affairs with ladkiyan and their bhais are putting them up? ठीक है, सबसे ज्यादा तो इनके अपने affairs होते हैं कि नहीं?
I mean, you know, frankly, it is.
And that's why, I think that is why Hamid Mir brought up what he brought up.
So let's, you know, so just to understand this properly is that the general in question, Faiz Hamid, was allegedly I mean, we don't know if it's Faiz Hamid, but from the two of you, from what the two of you have just told me, the DG ISI was, you know, allegedly, according to sources, speculation is rife, was having some sort of a relationship with somebody, and his wife got mad, and then she shot at him.
So
that's
the story
the
goes.
rumor. Yeah, that's the rumor.
Yeah, and let me say this.
And we did not put this rumor out.
This is, I'm in no position, and neither are you, Gul Bukhari, nor Dr. Taqi. You're in no position to verify this.
What the only thing that I would verify is that this is the rumor that Hamid was referring to.
That's right. But even if it's just a rumor or it's, you know, somebody in the wind, whether it's a straw or something, the fact is that the generals got really mad and very angry because they believed that a certain Lakshman Rekha had been crossed. Yes, Dr. Taqi?
That is correct. Because the Lakshman Rekha in this case being that a sitting DG ISI was referred to, even in innuendo, but there's a perspective out there that people could instantly connect that this story was already there. If I knew, everyone else knew. This was not very private information. So that was really, and one thing that these guys don't understand, when they get into people's face and they interact with people the way General Bajwa has been doing, you know, there's going to be some kind of fallout from that. There's a beautiful book written by a former DG ISPR, Brigadier A.R. Siddiqui, Pakistan military and its image. He mentioned in that the military maintains its sort of awe and aura by staying away from public life. And when you get into these kind of altercations with people, the way, for example, former DG ISPR Asif Ghafoor used to do on Twitter, you instantly lose that kind of aura. And what happens is then that they may say one thing or two or may land the first blow, but after that, the media, journalists, social media platforms, people are free to lunge back at them, and boy, do they lunge back at them every single day. They get it, and what they don't get is कि अपनी इज्जत अपने हाथ में है. You know, if you are a general, behave like one. You should not just be an officer, but a gentleman as well. And I think General Bajwa has acted quite in a thuggish fashion. The way he speaks about people, the way he privately disses individuals, it's horrendous. We keep hearing about anything that is critical of army, it hurts their morale. In my view, if something should be hurting their morale is this kind of loose talk that this man holds on in his court with 20, 30 journalists at a time, then goes out sort of really bad-mouthing individuals. You asked about Pakistan Tahaffuz movement. He talked about a PTM MNA who's under arrest in Sindh province, which is under Bilawal Bhutto Zardari's party. Yes. So he talked about that. He talked about a blogger. He talked about an individual journalist. I mean, you are army chief and part of the hybrid regime which is running the country. You should concern yourself with more important topics than what a blogger may or may not have said on the social media. So this type of micromanagement that these guys are trying to do, that also gets them into all these petty feuds and this for all I care, General Faiz Hamid could have 10 affairs. But when they're going after Absar Alam, they're going to hear back from Absar's fraternity as well. You know, agar peti band ka bhai hai, to likhne wala bhi likhne wale ka bhai hai.
Sahi, last comments, Gul Bukhari, would you like to go first? What happens now? How do you see this unfold?
I think that, you know, as Dr. Saib said, if they're going to keep on doing this, the backlash is going to keep on increasing. People are not going to sit quiet. And as you can see, it's happening. Look at what happened in Islamabad the other day. I mean, it was, by the way, a countrywide protest, but obviously there was more focus on Islamabad, etc. And the thing is that, you know, Dr. Saib mentioned that he's talking about bloggers, he's doing this. They have made it, Dr. Saab said they should be doing more important things. But the fact is, they're not actually doing the more important things. All they are doing is focusing on social media, focusing on peoples, focusing on, like Modi Sarkar. He's not focusing on the actual epidemic. He's focusing on managing the, perception, the narrative. This is exactly what these guys are doing. And they become so personal, so personal. He gave you a couple of examples. I'll give you an example of the previous DGISPR, who was then banned from Twitter, as you know, right? That he called me a stray dog. Now, is it the place of a spokesperson, the face of the army, to call a citizen a stray dog?
This is Asif.
And yes.
And
yes. Then, yes, he did that. And you know what? He didn't take my name initially. And this was 2 a.m., by the way. So he was in the habit of really, starting off in the night, and then he would do these crazy tweets, and he used to do it every night. He used to get drunk and do this, and it was obvious that he was drunk, right? And then his chamchas, Sarji, we know who you are talking about. And at 4 a.m. what he replied? He was still up, he was still drinking, and he was still tweeting, 4 a.m. He replied, Jane na jane, gul hi na jane, baag to sara jane. That who is the stray dog. After that, so this is the level they're operating at. This is the level. And by the way, there was a big backlash within the armed forces. And it was not out of love for me, but it was because he had degraded the office of a spokesperson of the army, that he's taking these personal pangas. He would take pangas with Indian actors. He would take panga with me. He would take panga with others. Then he would write to people saying, my patriotic Pakistanis, please take Bernal for Gul Bukhari. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that?
Just completely out of line, and getting into sort of personal comments on people. Dr. Taqi, your last comments. How do you think this is going to unfold in Pakistan? Do you think it's all going to get suppressed? That it'll all blow over in a few days, and until the next story?
I think eventually it would boil down to the media fraternity sticking together. But my consistent opinion is that the eventual change has to be political. Hybrid regimes cannot last forever. This dispensation is untenable, whether it is General Bajwa or somebody else. These systems cannot go on. A civilian rule with reasonable independence, they always get government, but they don't get the power to rule, has to return. Civilians will have to get their act together if Pakistan has to prosper and thrive as a forward-looking nation, rather than something which is stuck in a morass of General Bajwa and Imran Khan's making. It's a much better country, and it deserves much better than it has got.
I think even to survive, not even, I would say to Dr. Taqi, that not just to prosper and thrive, but I think to survive, it will have to go that route.
But who would have thought that Imran Khan, who was so popular across, not just across Pakistan and India especially, I mean, he's a real hero, if you like, across the world. He's such a known face. Who would have thought that under his watch, something like this would happen, and the media fraternity in Pakistan would come out on the streets and stand in favor of freedom of speech and expression?
It's very unfortunate that he has this image abroad but we Pakistanis know what he is. We've known of his hypocrisy forever. And
Well,
Dr. Saab would agree.
Well, on this note, I'd like to thank you both very much, Gul Bukhari
Thank
in
you.
London and Dr. Mohammed Taqi in Florida in the US. I just want to say on my own behalf that here in India, journalists do stand with the journalists of Pakistan, speaking out in favor of freedom of speech and expression. We can't do very much. We're sitting over here in the middle of a pandemic, but on social media and through channels like this, we do offer our support. But thank you both very much for your time, for joining me on the Print Debates.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.